Good morning, everyone, and welcome. Sounds like you can hear me, so that's good. My name is Reverend Amanda Schuber, and I am so thrilled to be with you this morning. This is actually my second time being with your congregation. I came in the early 2000s, and it is my joy to be back with you again. I want to, let's see, my thing has decided to lock. There it goes. To start this morning with a chalice lighting called On the Brink from Leslie Takahashi. All that we have ever loved and all that we have ever been stands with us on the brink of all that we aspire to create, a deeper peace, a larger love, a more embracing hope, a deeper joy in this life that we share. So again, welcome. I want to tell you a little bit about me to start with, and I want to say hello to our online friends as well. I know that in the congregation, you can't see them at the moment, but they are there and lovely, and we are so glad to have everyone joining us. My name again is Reverend Amanda Schuber. I serve the High Street Unitarian Universalist congregation in Macon, Georgia. I am a dedicated Southern minister, which means that I have made the commitment to stay in the South as a Unitarian Universalist minister for as long as it is safe for my family. That is getting harder and harder, but we are doing our best to stick it out. Let's see, I have been a part of the BCT program since the early 2000s. We were trying to see the number of congregations that I have been in, and it looks like I am right at 100. We're not sure if your congregation is my 100th or if I've tipped over a couple weeks ago, but all that is to say, I've been doing this a long time. This was my first call to ministry. I did not want to be a minister. I heard the call many, many years ago, and I just sent it on to voicemail because I was not interested in the messiness that is ministry and congregational life. And so I did this instead. And then in 2016, after the elections, I realized that I could no longer ignore that call. And so I entered seminary at Star King, which is one of our two Unitarian Universalist seminaries in the country. That one is located, well, it used to be located in Berkeley. It's now in, I forget, just down the road. And then we have another one in Chicago, which is Meadville Lombard. And then a lot of us go to other congregations around. I have served numerous congregations in various capacities. My current congregation, I serve as a developmental minister. I've been here about a year and a half. And my job is to help them bridge the gap between their younger members and their older members and work on some developmental goals. Developmental ministers are matched with congregations based on our particular skill set. Mine happens to be, I am not afraid of conflict. I can sit in that space and find joy and hope within conflict. And I think we need to get better at how to do conflict because it is a natural part of our existence. And so that's one of the things that I excel at. I also excel at building community. This is something I love to do. These kinds of hard conversations are right in my wheelhouse. They make me extremely happy because I love to see congregations wrestle with our values and how those play out in the world. I am a mom. I have 3 children. My oldest daughter, Samantha, is married to Cody. They are both in the Air Force and they live in South Dakota. I don't know why they stay in South Dakota, but they do. They've had options to go elsewhere, but they really love it up there. I also have a 13-year-old daughter and a almost 11-year-old son. So I spend a lot of time traveling in the car, getting them to dance and baseball and all the things that parents do. I am a taxi. I am thrilled to be with you this morning and so excited that you are engaging in this work. I imagine that some of you have done BCTs before and been a part of that process, so you may recognize some of what we're talking about today. The important thing to remember is that this work never ends. We are constantly bombarded every single day with various stimuli that impact and influence the way we think about the world. For instance, you might be driving down the street and get cut off and go, gosh, those teenagers, they don't know how to drive, right? And so that is reaffirming some biases that we have. So I want to let you know a few things first. Let's see if I can get my screen to share again. Come on, you can do it. There we go. So it's important to remember a few things in this process. We want to assume good intentions. This is because we all come from different places. We all are influenced in different ways by news, by family, by the things that we are interested in, by our friends. But we're all coming to this space because we care deeply about our denomination and you care deeply about your congregation. So we're going to assume good intentions as people speak and share their stories. I know that I probably have a few extroverts in the congregation there. This is sort of a trait of many you use. And I want to just encourage you to practice the idea of take space, make space. I'm an introvert myself. I get very excited about talking about the things that I'm passionate about. And I'm married to an introvert. And so I have had to learn over the years that while my extrovert tendencies are useful in conversation, they keep it going, that sometimes I need to step back and hold silence for my the introvert people in my life so that they can marinate for a minute on the things before they talk about them. Silence is not bad, my friends. I want you to lean into discomfort. These conversations can be uncomfortable sometimes. They can bring up things that we just really don't want to talk about or that make us frustrated. I want to encourage you to lean into that, to settle in, to remember that we all have good intentions and that we're all here to learn. Remember to breathe. Breathing is really important, and I know that it comes automatically for all of us, except when we are tense, and then we tend to hold our breath. So if you start to feel frustrated or you are feeling anxious, I encourage you to take 3 or 4 deep breaths and just settle back into your body. We always want to use I statements. We're going to be telling some stories today, and we want to make sure that we are speaking from our own experiences and not in generalization. Please feel free to take breaks as you need. Be a fidgeter if you need to. When I am sitting in these kinds of meetings, if I'm not leading them, I always have something to crochet in my hands because I cannot not have something in my hands. I currently have a little fidget that I like to play with during meetings. So please feel free to get up and stretch and move around as you need. It's really important that we take care of our bodies in this process. Lastly, I want to encourage you to share the learning, but save the story. You're going to be hearing some stories today from your friends there with you, and on Zoom, we're going to have some breakout rooms as well. And I want you to, when you leave here, I want you to share your excitement or your interest or the things that you heard that impacted you, but I want you to save the actual story for the person who is telling it. So you can share your experience and your feeling, but if you've heard a story that has deeply touched you and you want to share that, find a way to make it not be connected to the person who said it. So let them tell their own stories. We need to have that space for each other. All right. So I am interested to know who is in the room. So you can just raise your hands. Who in the congregation is part of the board? Okay, I see some hands. Great. Who is on the search committee? Who is your search committee? All right, I want you to show these folks some love. They work so hard on your behalf, and they are doing an amazing ministry that if you've never served on a search committee, you cannot even begin to understand. Also show their family love, because they also are making a huge sacrifice because your search committee is meeting so often and planning so often. So thank you, search committee, for all you do. What about social justice? Do you have any social justice people present? All right. What about a choir? Is there a choir? Are there choir people present, or music people? Okay. Wonderful. Wonderful. What about worship? Do you have worship teams and people who help with worship? Fantastic. What about who am I missing? Finance. Who's on finance? All right. I love our finance people. They don't get enough love. Finance is hard. Fantastic. Thank you. What about small group ministry? Do we have anybody do y'all do small groups by chance? Okay, great. A care team. Do you have like a caring committee, a caring circle, a caring team? Wonderful. So there are a lot of people in this room. So I'm going to go into a few other things. Do we have anybody who is retired? I know this. I know the answer. There we go. We have a lot of retired people. It's Florida. That's how that goes. I get it. Do we have any grandparents in the room? Fantastic. Grandparenting is the best gig in town. My children have said they're not having any grandkids for me, so I have adopted a grandkid that I picked up from somewhere. I love it. It is the best job ever. What about tennis players? Do we have any tennis players?
Pickleball.
Pickleball. That's the big thing now, isn't it? All right. I'm a tennis player. I have not taken up pickleball, but people keep telling me I need to. What about, does anyone snore? Are there any people who snore? Are you going to tell? See, what I like about this question is if there are couples in the room, generally one of the spouses will go, no, it's them. They do. They tell on each other. What about left-handers? Do we have anybody who's left-handed in the room? That's unusual. Typically in these workshops, I have a larger than average percentage of left-handed people. Some people have suggested that there are more left-handed UUs than any other denomination. I don't know if it's true, but we'll go with it. So the reason I wanted to kind of see who was in the room is to remind you that we are all more than one thing, right? Most of you raised your hand more than once, or could have, if we kept going, raised your hand more than once. So we all hold multiple identities at the same time. That means that more than one thing can be true. So the reason we do beyond categorical thinking is because in the search process over the years, we have learned, and ministers have told us, that there are bias that plays into the search process and how congregations look and feel about ministry. So I can tell you right now, I'm queer, I'm gay. So a lot of times what I get is, oh, she's the gay minister in town. Well, that's not necessarily not true, but I am a lot more than the gay minister in town. I'm also a fierce advocate for disability justice. In fact, in addition to serving at High Street, I serve as the Disability Justice Associate for the Side with Love organizing strategy team. So I spend a lot of time doing that work. I'm also the parent to a neurospicy kid, and the sister to a brother who has deep mental health challenges. I also live with disabilities of my own. I also play tennis. I'm a singer. I love the theater. I am terrified of cockroaches. And I have way too many animals in my house. So I am a lot more than the gay minister or the gay parent. And to narrow me down into that one focus really excludes a huge wealth of information about who and what I am. When we assign one characteristic to an individual, we not only take away their autonomy, but we take away their story and the fullness and richness of who they are as an individual. And it doesn't allow us to look beyond that particular thing. It also narrows them into our perception of what that means. So for a lot of people, being the gay minister comes with certain attributes that I may or may not have. So it's really important as we move through this process to think about that and how it assigning a person into one category limits our understanding and our connection to them. So right now, I want you to break up into little groups. I'm going to give you directions, and I want you to break up into maybe 3 people together, maybe a 4 if you need to online. I'll put you all in a room together, so there'll be a few of you online. And what I want you to think about is this. Let's see. I'm going to have you. Let's see, how am I going to do this with this group? All right, so I want you to count off. I see a lovely human in the front row wearing a black shirt. You want to raise your hand? There you go. Hello, it's nice to meet you on the first row. All right, so on the first row, you are going to start off by counting. We're going to count to 4, okay? So go ahead, and I want y'all to count off and remember your numbers. 1, 2, 3, 4.
1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4.
1,
2,
3, 4,
1,
2,
3,
4, 1,
2, 3, 4, 1, 2,
3.
4, 1, 2.
Is that everyone?
4. So you I'm 3. Okay. 4, 1,
2, 3, 4.
1.
All right, did that get everyone?
Yeah.
Fantastic. Okay, you did a great job. It is hard to do that virtually where I can't help by pointing to you. So fantastic. That's the hardest thing you will do today, I promise. All right. So my ones, if you were 1, or if you don't remember your number, just assume you're a 1. I want you to think about how your life would have been different if you were a different race or ethnicity than you currently identify. How would your work have been different? How would your childhood have been different? Your education, your social life? How would life have been different for you if you were a different race or ethnicity? And I want you to think beyond black and white, okay? I want you to think about, there are more than just black and white in this world, and they all come with different experiences. My 2s, I want you to think about how your life would have been as a different gender. My 3s, I want you to think about how your life would have been if you were differently abled than you are now. And I want to remind you that disability comes in many forms. And my 4s, I want you to think about how would your life have been different if you were a different sexual orientation than you are now. All right. So 1s are race and ethnicity, 2 is gender, 3 is ability, and 4 is sexual orientation. And I want you to think about how your life would have been different, okay? My online folks, Beverly, you're a 1, so that's race. Thomas, you're a 2, that's gender. Is it Janine or Jenny? I'm sorry if I'm saying it wrong. You're a 3, that's ability. Kim, you're a 4. That would be sexual orientation. And Dave, you're a 1. So that would be race. And I'm going to put you all into a room together. Okay. So we're going to take about 10 to 15 minutes to go through this. So don't spend a whole lot of time. Remember that you want to hear as many people talk as possible. All right. Is that cool? Everyone got it?
Supposed to get together.
Yeah, you can just kind of scooch together, make your own groups of 3 or 4. You don't have to separate. You just kind of, you don't have to be in this group with your number. All the numbers can mix. It's okay.
So what she's saying is you do not have to group by number. You are literally just getting into small groups of 3 or 4 to discuss your numbers ideas. So you don't have to move around a whole lot. You're all just going to discuss together.
All right, my online people, you've been invited to a breakout room. So you should be able to just click on that link. Dave, did you get an invitation?
I've never gone. I don't want to read it. There's nobody, right? This is a number. I was glad it's, you know, age and I don't know how to last.
Oh, no.
I'm talking about it, 'cause that's my number. Yeah.
Your job. That was perfect.
Well, mine was pretty, a lot of chapter, I see both sides. So if I could change what's happening in the house, I see that one getting up and going.
No.
Even though Except for silence. Then you just be like, very angry. They don't know. Very good for me.
Speak off. See that.
Now, adaptability and stuff. I love to go to school, but yeah, I'm not usually, you know, and when this one went to Greece, I remember a lot of people that lost. And they said, stay on the road.
My mom.
Right.
Yeah.
But really, when you think about it, it's not, what happened, that is not been able to. Right. It's just like,
Very
one of the things I find most difficult is my husband had a degenerative I mean, you find it because they can hide it through certain sales. And if I see somebody, they want to say, they dress the same. And yet,
You have about 2 minutes left. 2 minutes left.
well, they get a criminality already. Because cognition. When I hear about things like non-traumatic, don't stop you. Mental institution, and I say, oh, this is even from professional, it's so sharp. When you can see it, you can see it. You can't imagine how you deal with someone. Say that's not. Some sort of that was.
Yeah.
You're not. Oh.
How would your life be? Well, yeah, when I think the disability. Mine. How would life be different than become this.
All right, so if we could, let's come back to our center. Thank you so much.
Good idea.
Thank you so much. I know it was interesting conversation. I hope you found the conversation stimulating and interesting. It's always nice to hear each other's stories. Thank you so much. So in your groups, I know that you heard a lot. I hope everyone got a chance to speak. I want to just sort of hear from a few of you, and you're going to have to speak rather loudly, or we can maybe have our online moderator translate for us. So if you are a 1, so that was race and ethnicity. Would you like to tell us how your life would have been different, just very briefly? Do I have a 1?
Hey, Matt. Who was in 1? What's the toy? What about you, Mike? No, I heard that we deviated from our task immediately and got on to gender. That's oh, well. Who was number 1? Just you? No.
I was a 1.
Fantastic, whoever that was.
What was the question?
The question was, how would your life have been different? You want to share with us how your life would have been different? if
Yeah,
you
I
were
wouldn't have been
race?
anywhere near successful over the course of my life because I was a white person that was in pretty good privileged positions.
Okay. So it would have been very different then, right? All right, so what about a 2? Is there another 1 who wants to speak, or is there a 2? All right, I see a hand raised towards the back in a white shirt.
Oh, we got it. We got the mic. We have the mic.
Okay,
The mic.
You said you were 2.
so how would your life have been different?
My life? I have no idea. Do you?
You think you can predict your life based on?
I have some
I don't.
thoughts.
Well, that was the question, so.
How would my life have been different? I don't know.
Okay,
What was number two was what? Oh, we're still on number one, and here we go, Jackie. You're on.
Well, I went into the workforce in 1970, so I'm a woman. And if I was in a different race and was like a black woman or Asian woman or whatever, I mean, where would I have worked at that point? I had to work as a secretary because nobody would hire me as a writer for public relations. And that lasted a couple of years. So it would have been tremendously different.
sure,
Today, hopefully it's not the same.
absolutely. All right, what about a two? That was, we'll see, what was two? Two was ability, right?
A gender,
Gender, two was gender. Tell me how your life would have been
That
different.
Christmas.
I would have fit in better with all my male cousins. I would probably have had to serve in Vietnam. As a woman,
No,
there were times when I didn't feel safe. And as a woman, you're always on guard. Which men don't think about that. I don't think so much.
Mhm.
What else is a two?
Yeah, is there another two that wants to speak to how your life would have been different?
The first story that comes to my mind is that when I was in a position to take on a local judge, because he was doing something that was not quite kosher, he told me that I couldn't possibly have the job I had because it always been a man.
Hmm.
So you want to see the rug being pulled out from under you when you're going in with a position of authority and representing an organization. I mean, I really wanted to slug him.
Mhm. Absolutely, thank you. All right, a three, that was ability, three. Someone up front that seems, thank you for our mic runners. I appreciate you so much.
Yeah, mine would have been really significantly different. I was born on a farm. We didn't have indoor plumbing. So mine is ability, okay?
Mm.
So we had an outhouse. I walked to a one-room country. I walked a mile to a one-room country schoolhouse for the first 2 years. Yeah, through the snow in Michigan. College probably would have been okay. I went into the Peace Corps. I wouldn't have gotten into the Peace Corps. My way of avoiding the draft was going to Vietnam and serving on a Department of Defense contract for 3.5 years. So, I mean, it would have been really significantly different for me.
Sure, thank you. Any other threes want to talk about how your life would have been different?
Play tennis.
Yes, I play tennis and ski and. Well, fours.
Okay, are there any fours that want to speak to how your life would have been different? That's sexual orientation.
Tom, you're close to the mic. Cindy, do you want to speak?
I'll speak.
Okay, so how my life would have been different if I were a different sexual orientation. Truth be told, I probably wouldn't have figured out a whole lot by myself that I could identify as how to be because people were not forthcoming with that information when I grew up, and not in my community, not in the Christian schools I attended or the churches I went to. I probably, if I were lesbian or gay or bisexual or even questioning, I would have been quiet, kept it to myself, had nobody to talk to about it, including a nurse at school because of the school I had to go to.
Sure.
So my life would have been different that way. I also would not have chosen. Well, that's not true. I was going to say I wouldn't have known what my future would be, that I would do AIDS work for 14 years before I retired. And doing my AIDS work was the first time I actually met a human being who acknowledged their orientation to be different than my heterosexual orientation.
Thank you for that. I see one behind you. There we go.
Yeah, I'm Jean. I think our group had a very active discussion. I feel that had I been transgendered, for instance, a sense that my body was not right, as a child growing up in the 40s and 50s, I would have experienced terrible guilt and shame. I don't know who I would have spoken to as a child. I don't think I would have told my parents. And I think I would have tried to outwardly behave as normal a person as I could between my peers. And I think by the time I reached a period in my life where I felt some level of adulthood, I still would have been lost at sea.
Sure. Thank you so much. Does any of our online people want to unmute and tell us what the difference was and how your life would have been different? Beverly?
Hi, yes, I had the topic of race and my sense of what would have happened had I, let's just say, been a Black woman. I don't think my career would have taken off as well as it has. I don't even know that I would have been hired by the firm that I spent a lot of years with and ended up buying out the owner. I don't suspect he would have even interviewed me, or if he did, I don't think he would have taken me seriously. So, and then if I had been Black and worked in my corporate career, I think I would have had encountered prejudice for sure, because it was mostly a white world of corporate executives that I was serving. I just think it would have been harder. I don't think it would have been impossible as long as I had the skills and the experience base and the knowledge. I think that would have come through, but I would definitely think there would have been either overt or not overt prejudice operating at all times.
Absolutely. Thank you, Beverly. Any of our other online folks want to chime in? You can feel free to, Thomas.
Yeah, I think I was very typically male. I played baseball. I loved Davy Crockett before that. My sister was the one who was the artist, and things would have been very different for me had I not been typically male.
Okay, thank you. So we do this exercise for a couple of reasons. One, because the vast majority of us, when we think about how our life would have been different, unless you were going from female to male, that's the one caveat. We tend to pull out the harder aspects, the negative aspects of how our life would have been different, right? We automatically go there. So we know that bias exists. We are fully aware of its existence. But what we forget is that it still exists, and it exists in everyday life. And because we carry these things, almost all of the things that you talked about and how your life would have been different were influenced by outside sources. The pressure from the lack of someone to talk to, the perceptions by a boss, all these things that are these outside influences pushing in on us when it comes to identity. And so this plays out in congregations too, in numerous ways. So now we're going to shift a little bit, but first I want to do a little bit of housekeeping. I want to tell you that we have decided that we're going to take, instead of an hour break at 12 o'clock, we're going to take a 45-minute break at 12 o'clock. Okay. And that's for several reasons, but we think we can do this. And I just wanted to let you know. So we will take a 45-minute break at 12 o'clock. If you do if some of you are planning to run a quick errand, no worries. This is being recorded, so you can always go back and it'll be okay. I have another meeting I have to get to too. So I'm actually in meetings until 6 o'clock tonight. So I will be on Zoom from now until 6. So it's a long day for this minister. But I want to talk a little bit for the rest of our time before we break about what bias is. Let me get the screen up. Move all the things around. Stop. That goes over there. That goes over there. There are way too many things on my screen right now. All right, so bias exists and we see it and it comes out in numerous ways in the search process. We see it around ministers of color. We see it around LGBTQIA ministers, disabled ministers. We see bias play out in age and gender and regionality, socioeconomic status, background, and marital family status. We see it across the board. Is this an exhaustive list? No. I'm going to give you, we focus primarily in BCT on ministers of color, LGBTQIA plus ministers, disabled ministers, and those are the three primary ones. Now, more and more, we are hearing more about age and regionality that doesn't really come up until they're in the congregation, and regionality really does make a difference in some cases. So we see some bias about how all these things work. We used to include women within the program, but now that we have 80% of our ministers coming out of seminary are female identified, we don't include it. However, I want you to know that despite the fact that we are a denomination that supports equality, women or female identified ministers within our congregation are still paid less than their male counterparts, and they are often not offered the more lucrative head minister positions. So we still have work to do. There is also a really extreme bias about single parents, especially women as single parents in ministry, and how they can or cannot handle the work and be a parent at the same time. We do not see that for men, though. We're not seeing that same sort of thing. So we cover bias in a lot of different ways. Now, here's what I want you to know. I am not here to shame you and tell you that you are a bad you because you are biased. That is not what I'm here to do. We all have bias. I've been doing this work for over 20 years. I still find that there are places in my life where my culture influences me, where my family dynamics influence me, where the news influences me, where the barista who gets my coffee wrong every single morning influences my bias. All these things play in. I grew up Catholic and Jewish, so I like to say that I have enough guilt for a small country. I have worked through my guilt. I don't believe guilt helps us. I believe it gets us stuck in a pit of quicksand and pulls us down so we can't move and grow. So if you start to feel guilt about these things, throw it aside. Guilt is not going to help you one bit. What I am here to do and what I hope you will take with you is the recognition that it is a lifelong process of recognizing how bias works within our lives. It's not about getting it right all the time. It's about recognizing that when we don't get it right, why that has happened, and hoping and working towards being better next time we encounter a similar situation. All right. So bias starts out in the form of microaggressions in many ways. There are a few kinds of microaggression that happens. Micro assaults. These are explicit discriminatory actions that intend to hurt. They are generally conscious and deliberate, although they may be subtly delivered. So this might show up in not inviting a minister to certain events, for whatever reason, because you don't like them based on some kind of characteristic. It might show up in deliberately forgetting or deliberately not calling a minister with their title. I've had this happen in our local newspaper here. We have a very small hometown newspaper, and the editor, I spent a lot of time giving quotes to that paper. And the editor refuses to put the Reverend in front of my name because as he has told me, I have no authority, religious authority as a woman. So this is a micro assault. It is deliberate intent. Then there's micro invalidations. These are comments or actions that exclude, negate, or dismiss the feelings, thoughts, or experiences of a person. This might be when someone is a member of the congregation or is using the elevator in the building, and they say, you know, that elevator has a lot of problems. It is not really workable. And someone who is not disabled looks at them and says, well, you know, it's not that bad. Right? It's not acknowledging or hearing the thoughts, feelings, or experiences of the person expressing them. That's called a micro invalidation. It's basically invalidating what they're saying. It's just glazing over it. And then micro insults. These are more subtle, often unintentional behaviors or comments that convey rudeness, insensitivity, or demean a person's identity or heritage. This might be if you have a Native American First Nations minister walking into a meeting and someone in that meeting holds up their hand and goes, how? Right? It's this cultural insensitivity or rudeness, probably not meant to cause any harm, but it still demeans a person's identity or heritage. And I can tell you all three of these incidences that I've spoken about have happened within the last year within our congregations. Any questions on microaggressions? All right, let's move on. So we have explicit bias. And this is where, again, it's pretty straightforward. No girls allowed. This is the sign we see on the Little Rascals clubhouse. This is very, very clear. Blacks need not apply. Right? I think everyone in the room probably has had some form of experience, either directly or indirectly, with explicit bias. This is no holds barred. We are going to just come right out and say what we mean, and we know that it is causing harm. Next, we have unconscious bias. These are the ways in which, like I said, sort of the how, where we, we say things, but we don't really realize that we are engaging in some bias. This is like when we look at a very tall Black man or Black woman and go, oh, you must be a basketball player. Because there is an assumption that Black, if you're Black and tall, you're going to play basketball, right? Or this is an assumption that a low income person who identifies as, or is low income, that they are uneducated, right? We see this happen with people who from the North who have not engaged with people from the South. They often will think that our accents are cute and make us dumb. In fact, when I go above the Mason-Dixon line, I intentionally lose my Southern accent in order to not deal with that form of bias. Any questions on unconscious bias? No? All right. Confirmation bias. This is a sneaky one. This is one that we have seen gain a lot of traction since 2016 in our political system. Confirmation bias is the tendency to search for, interpret, favor, recall information that confirms or supports one's prior beliefs or values. So if you look at the graphic, we have facts and evidence, and the evidence is something that we might ignore. And then we have our beliefs, and we let that kind of overlap just enough so that our beliefs are confirmed, whereas all the other evidence is sort of disregarded. It's like, okay, well, this one said, there might be a small sample that confirms what I believe. So we're going to go here. We see this a lot in our political discourse these days, where the whole story is not considered. And so we just, people are looking at just where their beliefs overlap with some of it. And we are making laws based on this confirmation bias. This is happening in Florida right now, as you all know, with book banning. This is a book banning confirmation bias becomes very, very present in the book banning conversations, looking at just a piece of text and decide out of context and using that piece of text to confirm our belief that certain kinds of things in language are dangerous. Any questions on confirmation bias? All right, there's another way that this plays out, and this is called the halo effect. And the way the halo effect is where we perceive someone through what they do best and extend that feeling or success or competence to the rest of them. So you might be talking to someone about a minister and that person says, oh, they just give the best sermons. They are just the best person all the way around. They are just awesome. They are the best minister I've ever heard. And the other person says, you know, I really have not had a great experience with them in pastoral care and are calling me back. But the other person then looks and goes, oh no, they are just amazing. This is the halo effect. We see this happen in looks as well. There are studies that tell us that people who are perceived as good looking are perceived as better, smarter, and all the other wonderful attributes than people who might not seem as perfect in our standard of beauty in this country. So the graphic shows a man on the left wearing a lab coat and a tie. His hair is sort of perfectly done. He's got that nice square jaw that we appreciate in people. And then the man on the right is also in a lab jacket and coat and tie, but he is rather disheveled. His features are a little bit exaggerated. He's wearing glasses. He kind of gives us that mad scientist vibe. When we look at these two individuals, the one on the right has a halo above his head, signifying that he is without any problems, whereas the other one, we're not sure we can trust him. The halo effect and the horn effect go hand in hand. This is when a negative experience or personal characteristic that is considered negative disproportionately impacts our overall perception of a person. This comes into play a lot when we look at people's weight to determine if they are a good person or not. This is where the horn effect comes in. We can look at an overweight person and decide that they are slovenly, they are without any kind of discipline. Clearly, they're not smart enough to not be overweight, all these things. This is where the horn effect comes in. And so we assign these characteristics to a person based on one attribute that may or may not be connected to the other things. Any questions or thoughts on those? No, y'all are just running through this. You got it. All right. I want to, let's see, let me get to my other thing here. Oops. Let me stop sharing for a minute and then we'll talk about potholes. So I want to give you an example of another form of bias that happens, and that's called selective filtering. This is one of my favorite kinds of bias to talk about because we do it all the time. I have a few examples for you. Now I'm going to tell you a story about my grandmother, bless her heart. And I can do that because I do say bless her heart, so all is forgiven, all right? So my dear grandmother, I am the oldest grandchild out of 15. I was the only grandchild for 8 years. I could do no wrong. I was in speech and drama and choir and band. I excelled in school. I was the apple of my family's eye. I sat on a pedestal that was really high and grounded in my ability to do no wrong and to never, ever embarrass my family. When I was 21 years old, I came out on CNN. Yeah, CNN, you know, the news station, headline news. I gave an interview at the Gay Pride Festival in Birmingham, Alabama, to the local TV station. It was then picked up by CNN, that feed. My great aunt, who was like 3 times removed, happened to be watching the news at that moment, called my grandmother to tell her that I was at a gay pride festival in Birmingham. When I got home from that festival at 2:30 in the morning, because we didn't have cell phones at that time. At 2:30 in the morning, I got home and I was checking my voicemail before I went to bed, and I got a phone call from my mother that said, who knew and who loved me deeply, who said, "Your grandmother knows your secret. You better think of something quick. Hope you had fun. Okay, bye." Because my mother has an awesome sense of humor. The next day, my grandmother called me. She told me that I was not allowed to come home because I was a disgrace. I was going to hell. Mind you, my grandmother hadn't been to church my whole life that I knew of. But I was going to hell, and I was not allowed to tell my grandfather that I was an abomination and living in sin because it would, quote, kill him. I was very close to my grandfather. He was a father figure in my life. My father passed away when I was 13. And so for the next 10 years, I managed to be working every single holiday when my grandfather wanted me to come home, and to do all the things that I needed to do to honor my grandmother's wishes, because I felt like I had embarrassed the family. Finally, after 10 years, my grandfather said, "No more. You are coming home to see us. It has been 10 years since we have seen you in person, and this is not going to work." So I went home with my mother to see my grandparents. That day, my grandmother made lunch for us. I was a vegetarian at the time, and every single item of food on that table had meat in it, because my grandmother, bless her heart, is a good passive-aggressive Southern woman. I came out to my grandfather that day, and he was fine. He asked me if I was happy, and I said yes, and he said that's all that mattered. My grandmother stomped out of the room throwing a fit, and my grandparents did not sleep in the same bedroom for the rest of my grandfather's life, because I apparently was a fight. Throughout those 10 years, occasionally my grandmother would call me, and she would say something like, "Amanda Jean," because I'm a good Southern girl, "Amanda Jean, I have decided that you simply cannot be gay." And I would say, "Okay, how does that work?" And she said, "Well, you're just too pretty." My grandmother had engaged in selective filtering. In her mind, she had an idea of what a lesbian looked like, and I did not fit. At the time, I had very long hair down to my waist. I never wore sensible shoes, but I apparently was pretty. My grandmother thought that a lesbian would have very, very short hair, would wear sensible shoes all the time, and would be rather homely. That day, after I talked to my grandmother, I went to the beautician and I said, "Cut all of my hair off because I'm tired of people not knowing I'm a lesbian." And I did. I cut all my hair off. It didn't help. I'm still way femme. So it wasn't helpful. But my grandmother had a vision of what a lesbian was, and I didn't fit that. So she was able then to separate me out through selective filtering. This happens a lot when we see people voting. They will vote a straight ticket and be very proud of that, but sit at my kitchen table and talk to me about how my family, before marriage was legal, about how my family deserved to have all the rights that they did. Yet they would vote directly against my family through the political structure. This again is selective filtering. Well, you're not that kind of gay, right? You're not that way. Another way that this kind of thing happens was our director of our program, Keith Cron, the Reverend Keith Cron, tells a great story about a Sunday that he was running late to a BCT, and he got up and he was preaching that Sunday for them before they did their workshop. And he preached, and he was in the receiving line afterwards, and a woman came up to him, shook his hand, and said, "I know why you're wearing that purple shirt." And he said, "Well, why?" And she said, "Because purple is the color of the gays." He looked at her and he went, "Well, actually, it was the only one that was clean." In his honor, I wear a purple shirt every time I do BCT because I love that story. Selective filtering and designating certain attributes to communities and spreading them out to everyone in that community is something that we see all the time. For a time in my life, I had to be in a wheelchair. It was amazing to me in that wheelchair how suddenly I became deaf and possibly with cognitive disabilities. And I say that because in that wheelchair, what I discovered is everyone yelled at me. They would start talking very loud and very slowly because I was sitting in a wheelchair and I was not standing. People who had known me my whole life suddenly decided that my physical mobility impairment obviously meant I was deaf and had cognitive disabilities as well. I loved being shouted at. It was fantastic. So this is another way that we automatically sort of move into these spaces of bias that impact people. And we say, oh, well, you know, it was a mistake, it happens. But what you have to understand is that this is like the 10 million paper cuts. Every day, people in these categories or with these identities, we face 10 million microaggressions a day. So if you think about a paper cut, it hurts. It shouldn't hurt, but man, do paper cuts, they smart. But think about every microaggression that happens is one paper cut. And microaggressions happen daily, multiple times a day. And that builds up over time and it wears people down. Any questions on any of that? All right, the last kind of bias I want to tell you about, because it's very important, this is a piece of confirmation bias, is what we call in ministry the rule of three. The rule of three states that if a minister who identifies in one or more of these identities is in the pulpit and over the course of 1 year, they talk about something related to their identity three times, there will be people in the congregation who call them a one-issue minister. So let's say in September, a minister who is a person of color talks about MLK. So he reads a speech that MLK gave for a service. And then 4 months later, there is a reading by Maya Angelou. And then 3 months after that, there is an announcement with excitement about an MLK Unity Day. There will be people within the congregation who say that all they talk about is being Black. So what do you think might be the number one, and the search committee can't tell, the number one reason that ministers with these identities, especially ministers of color, identify the reasoning why they have a shorter tenure? The average ministry these days lasts about 6 to 10 years for an average, it's average. But ministers in some of these categories and with multiple identities tend to have a shorter tenure, usually anywhere between 4 to 6, averages around 5. Why do you think they might have a shorter tenure? You just raise your hand. No one?
Unconscious bias.
Unconscious bias? Nope.
They get burned out.
Burnout? Nope. They cite that they have a shorter tenure because of the silence of the congregation when unconscious bias happens, or when direct bias happens. So when a minister is the recipient of one or more of these paper cuts, and it is witnessed by other members of the congregation, and the other members of the congregation say nothing, to counter that bias. It puts the minister in an awkward position. They have two choices. They can address that issue and talk about bias and talk about what happened. But then they put themselves in the position of being a one-issue minister with a chip on their shoulder. Or they can let it go. And then it will occur again and again and again and again. Silence is the #1 killer of ministry. Silence. All right. Any questions on the rule of 3 and how that plays in congregations? All right. Next, we're going to talk about sinkholes. Some of my colleagues call them potholes. I call them sinkholes. These are the things that coming into a new congregation, so let's think about 3 things that new active members might need to know about your congregation and the way you do things. What are 3 things that a new member might need to know about how you do things?
You don't like night meetings.
You don't like what?
Night meetings.
Night meetings. We don't like night meetings. Yes. Anyone else? Okay.
Meetings because we're old.
What's that?
We don't like night meetings because we're old.
Okay. Yeah.
Could I go back a little bit to the previous example before we stay in sinkhole? You got me thinking about something.
Okay, can we get a mic up to you and then that would, so that we can hear you? And yes, we absolutely can go back.
Could I go back to the previous one? 'Cause
Yes.
I have a question. It took me a little bit in my aging brain to formulate it.
That's okay.
In those instances where silence was a problem, when the minister was speaking to that issue, let's say having to do with race, in those instances, was he speaking because he or she perceived a problem in the congregation about that issue, or because it was a general problem in the population or the country, a law or something like that?
Probably a mix of both, because this happens a lot. This is not uncommon. We see it in ministers who are parents as well. If they talk about something that has to do with being a parent, that we see that rule of 3 pop up too. Oh my gosh, they only talk about kids and parenting. So I'll give you an example. I am what's called a storyteller minister. And so when I write sermons, I bookend my sermons. I start with a story and then I move into the meat and other things, but the story is the hook. And then I end with sort of referencing back to the story. That's how I generally write. It's not every time, but 90% of my sermons are very personal because I'm a storyteller minister. And so, so that tells a lot about the experiences I've had in life. And a lot of my experiences come from being a parent. And so I have one congregant who doesn't have children, and who really cannot stand that I talk about my kids so much. And I reference stories and things that have happened in our lives as parents and children together in that space. And so one day he was coming and he told me about this, and he was standing after service. He came up to me and was really kind of irate, and I listened. And another member standing next to him said, all you do is talk about your kids. And she said, no, it's interesting that you say that, because what I hear Reverend Amanda talk about, and then she went through the long list of things that I actually talk about. And at that point he went, well, I've never thought about it like that. But having her say, well, I experience this differently, changed the conversation. It took the onus off of me to defend my identity. and my understanding of how I am and how I am in the world and how I am as a preacher. And it put it into another perspective that gave the congregation the power to hold each other accountable to our values and to really sitting with inquisitive questions rather than accusatory. So if he come up to me and if he had said, you know, I'm really interested in, you know, you talk about your kids a lot, and I feel like that kind of dominates the conversation. I wonder, you know, why is that so important in your life, or how does that play in your life? Are there other things that you could reference? You know, that's a different way of saying it rather than just being accusatory of all you talk about is your kids, because that's not really what I talk about. They're a piece of it maybe, but there's a whole, I talk about race, I talk about, you know, all the things that ministers talk about. And I sometimes bookend it with stories about my kids. And the truth, I went back and looked. I've only talked about my kids in sermons in the year and a half I've been here 4 times. What's that? I can't hear. Can we get a mic?
That was a laugh.
Okay, yeah. So there's just that perception, and it's easy, but when it can be countered, when someone else can say, oh, you know, that's interesting. I hear Reverend Amanda talk, like, see, I talked about Israel and Palestine last week. And the week before I talked about immigration. The week before that, I talked about beloved community. So, you know, there are all these things that I talked about in addition to, but he was listening for the kids thing because he was aggravated by it. Does that make sense?
Yes. You have a comment?
I'd like to go back to the question about the Black minister and silence. I'm assuming that, no, I'm not assuming. There's a lot of people that believe that silence means consent. And any minister worth his salt should be able to figure out that that doesn't mean consent, and to start dealing with the silent congregation as an opportunity to rejoin them.
Tell me more about how silence in the face of oppression. Tell me more about how silence in the face of oppression is not consent.
That wasn't what I said.
Well,
what I'm saying is, let's answer my question first, and then I'll do yours. If a minister doesn't hear anything as a result of what he said from the pulpit, or she said from the pulpit, she can't assume that because nobody complained that there wasn't a problem.
Well, let me see if I'm understanding you right. A congregation that is not talking to the minister if there is a problem has bigger problems, because that means they're talking to each other, and that's triangulation. So triangulation is when there's a problem, you have a problem with somebody, but rather than talk to them about it, you either remain silent or you and stew on it, or you talk to somebody else about it to get your feelings confirmed. And then you bring other people into that. So that's triangulation. So it's a silent congregation that has problems with what's going on with the minister and is not talking to the minister about it, is not giving the minister any chance. It's not the minister's job to read your mind and know that there's a problem. I think that's what I'm hearing you say. And a minister should be always engaging the conversation, but it is our responsibility and in our values to stay in covenant and beloved community. We are a covenantal community that believes in direct conversation, and silence when there is a problem is acquiescence. It's an agreement that if someone knows there's a problem and they're not saying something about it, they're just remaining silent, that creates a situation that is untenable, because you're not giving the minister a chance to do anything about it. Now, what I'm talking about though directly is silence in the face of oppression, because bias, active bias is oppressive in its nature. So if a member of the congregation says something negative that you know to not be true about a minister, and you remain silent in that, that is agreement. That is avoidance, but it's also agreement.
Silence means consent. During my lifetime, it was one of the arguments about whether or not a woman was raped. Okay.
But we're talking though about bias. We're not talking about violence.
We're talking about
Violence and bias are two different things. We're talking about subtle bias. This is those microaggressions. And where silence comes into microaggressions is when we stand by and we go, oh, that's just Joe. You know how Joe is. Right? So we all know, we all have those people in our lives, right? Maybe it was Uncle Frank, or I'm sorry if there's a Frank or a Joe in the room, or Aunt Sally or whatever. Those who say things that we know to be inflammatory or untrue, and we don't respond to that. We don't challenge that. That is where silence becomes dangerous. Because that is allowing something to continue to happen because we don't want to be uncomfortable. And that's where we run into trouble.
Thanks.
Sure. I don't know if I answered that. I hope I did. It's a little hard. It's a very complicated situation when you've got other scenarios, but we are explicitly talking about direct bias.
I think that I agree with you. I'm not disagreeing, but I think in the situation, what you gave us, where somebody complained about the fact that you're talking about your kids in sermons, if I was present for that, and it was just about your sermons, I might not say anything out of respect for the other member. But I would then come to you to confirm that I disagree with that. Now, if they said something about you being gay or fat or something like that, I would step right in. But I do agree with the fact that if we have silence, and I'm on the board of directors, so I'm aware that the silence, if we have problems, we have a little group of people that are causing, and that spreads, rumors spread.
Oh yeah.
But
again, that rule of three, it only takes 3 people to bring down a ministry.
Right, exactly. But you do have to understand that, what you first gave as an example is not maybe a good example, or, but if, like I said, if I was present and somebody said, I don't like your hairstyle, you're fat, I don't like the way you talk, of course, then I'd step right in. But I would go back to you privately.
Yeah. So, and thank you. And here's the thing, you can always disagree with me. I don't know everything. And the reason I give that example is because it is non-inflammatory. The inflammatory ones are easy, right? We know if someone says something about someone being gay or fat or whatever, we're definitely going to step in. I like to give the more nuanced one because it's a harder one, right? And coming back to me is great. It's always good to affirm your minister if you feel that they need that affirmation, but affirming them in public means so much more.
Can I say something, Amanda?
Sure.
Reverend Amanda. I agree with what Steve says. That's something that we all experience psychologically. You're standing near perhaps and you feel, well, maybe I'll be uncomfortable challenging them. But from what I've heard listening to you is there are ways to state a different opinion. And one of those ways, acknowledge the other person's perspective. Say, I can hear what you're saying. I think for you, from what I'm hearing, sermons that have a lot of kids they just don't work for you. But in my opinion, from my perspective, I'm usually very receptive to those. when
Yeah.
Reverend Amanda prevents those. So I think, so I'm sorry, I'm bringing it down to a semantic level, but
Mhm.
you've referenced it before. People need to be acknowledged first. And
Yes.
then they're entitled, and then I am entitled if I happen to be standing there in expressing my opinion that may not align with the other individual. Thank you.
Absolutely. You are so on target. Thank you for that. Yeah, and that's the thing. And it comes down to we're afraid of conflict. Nobody likes conflict, right? I'm sure there are people out there that do. Here's the thing though. I love when I am in a situation where it feels like, it's a little tense. I'm always going to come at it with curiosity. Always. Tell me more about that. I want to understand. Here's my perspective. I want to hear yours. And so there are ways to talk about these things. And here's the thing. If we don't practice doing it, then we don't do it. And what I like to tell congregations is, I want you to work at loving each other enough to engage in the more difficult conversations, or to challenge each other. I want you to love each other enough to do that. I want you to love that community. And that's what I tell people, my congregants, when they're in conflict, is I love you. And that is why I want to stay in this conversation with you, because I love you. And that makes all the difference when we can come at it from that kind of perspective. Real quick before we go, I want to talk about one thing before we take our break. We'll come back to potholes. But what I want to talk to you about is, oh, come on. There we go. Comfortable fit versus best fit. So when we think about our minister and having a minister, we think about wanting to have someone who makes us feel good, right? We want to leave Sunday service feeling good, feeling filled up and comfortable and all those things. So I like to think of ministry, that kind of ministry, as your favorite pair of sweatpants. Okay, you get home after a long day and you change out of your clothes and you put on your favorite pair of sweatpants, and they just hug you just right. They make you feel all warm and fuzzy. Everything is going to be fine in those, right? Well, that's not what ministry is. Ministry is more like your Thanksgiving Day pants. Those ones that you put on to go see the family, right? You got them. They look great. You look fantastic in them. It's sharp. You're looking sharp. You go and you have a big, wonderful meal that fills you up. But what you notice is that button on those pants, it's getting a little tight. Might be a little bit uncomfortable. And that is what ministry is. Ministry is not about the most comfortable fit. Ministry is about the best fit. And the best fit is not always going to be comfortable, because ministry should be disruptive. Because if you're not disrupted at some point, if you are not feeling afflicted or conflicted at some occasionally throughout that ministry, then you're not growing. As a person, you're not growing as a congregation, you're not growing as a denomination, or as humans in this world. We need to be disquiet sometimes. Princess Diana said, you cannot comfort the afflicted without afflicting the comfortable. And that is so true. So in this process, as your committee brings you a candidate, I want you to remember, you may not feel exactly comfortable with them. You may have pieces where you go, I just don't know about that one. But I want you to remember that minister is one human being ministering to all of you. And you're not always going to like what they say or how they do things, right? And they're not going to be perfect at everything, because they're not God. They're not Jesus walking on water. That may be what we expect, but that's not who they are, right? So we are looking for the best fit. Who is the person that this congregation needs to meet our future, to help us meet our future? And that doesn't always feel the most comfortable. I see one hand raised, and then we've got like 2 minutes. So let's see if we can get to that
Just
one
really,
hand.
really quickly, because I have another
Yeah.
commitment this afternoon, so I have to leave. So I grew up Catholic. I don't have any problem accepting who's ever coming because I was never asked, you know.
Yeah.
But getting back to the point of a minister who likes conflict or who accepts and who doesn't shy away from conflict. I think it's very important that we get a minister like that, because conflict does not exist. If you think conflict exists in this community here, we live in Florida.
Yeah.
And, you know, every time you step out of the bubble of the Unitarian congregation, there is conflict of some type. And I would really appreciate a minister who isn't going to be overwhelmed by that. Or too unable to get beyond it's really horrific in some area, in some areas, and for some things. So we need somebody really strong at heart who can represent us in the community, as well as, you know, be the best fit for us living in this greater environment. Then
absolutely.
That's
yeah, absolutely. And that's the thing. And that congregation is where you practice getting comfortable with conflict. If you can be comfortable with each other in conflict and working through conflict in ways that are respectful, grounded in our values, and centered with love, you're going to be able to go out into the world and deal with conflict as well. So this is where we practice, because that's the safe space to do it in, right? Because we love each other. Out in the world, you know, it makes a difference. And having a minister who is comfortable helping you work through internal conflict is a great asset. Is a great asset. All right, we are at 12:01, so I want to honor your time. We will come back at 12:45. I will start right on time. We're going to look at some of the answers that you brought forth on your surveys. If you do have to leave, that's okay. We are recording this session. Please do connect with your search committee later to see the recording if you can't stay for the whole time. And thank you so much for being with us. I will see you back at 12:45. And where we might find that we can step in and go with curiosity and love and say, wait, I have some questions. So again, that's all, never, and only. All right. So let me get my screen up here. We left on talking about the most comfortable fit versus the best fit. And our hope is that you will move through this process with an open mind, looking for the best fit, not the most comfortable fit. Let's see if I can get my screen to do its thing. I don't know why it doesn't want to. It gets stuck for some reason and doesn't want to do its thing. Oh, excuse me. There we go. All right. So let me get back to you. I'm so sorry. Technology is great because it means we can connect with each other, and it is always problematic because it means we can connect with each other. All right. Here we go. We're going to try this again. So why do we do this, right? Why does bias matter so much? And some of the questions I've heard over the years is, why does this questionnaire focus so heavily on race, ethnic, or gender minority orientations? Well, the reason is because that's what we're talking about. We're talking about how bias disproportionately impacts people with race, who are different race from the majority or the powerful majority, ethnicity and gender and other minority orientations, because we know that bias does impact these communities more heavily than others. Another one that I've heard is, how does anyone experience ableism? This is a big one. Ableism happens almost everywhere you go. And ableism isn't necessarily in our actions, it is quite frequently in our inactions or our inaction in general. This is when we do not recognize how our society is not built for people who have mobility challenges or they experience the world in ways that are outside of the mainstream. So what I mean by this is, like I said, I do a lot of disability work. And because of that, I spend a lot of time thinking about accessible spaces. And once you start to see how the world is not accessible, it is very difficult to go anywhere and not notice that issue at play. I can't walk into a grocery store. Well, grocery stores are pretty good. I can't walk into like a little boutique store or restaurants or churches without first looking around and finding the ways in which I in a wheelchair or my daughter with her sensory needs could move through the world and move in that space. So ableism is something that is prevalent everywhere. And what we hear quite often is, well, we don't have anybody that needs that particular accommodation. And my response to that is, and you never will. This is a very much a situation of, if you don't build the space in, they will not come. So we need to be anticipating need, not waiting for someone to come in and ask or demand it. So if your church does not have row cutouts or spaces for people to, with mobilities devices to sit in automatically without having to move a chair, that it is automatically, there is always a couple spaces that are not always in the back too. That's the other thing. People with disabilities tend to get relegated to the back in terms of accessible seating. And then also a companion chair for that person. So making sure that there is a space for someone who is with them, a spouse or a caregiver, a child or whoever they have with them, to sit next to them. It's about looking at how do we have a big, large print hymnals available easily, and do the greeters know where they are? So this is the way that ableism plays out in our life. It's especially true when we look at things and we go, well, it's not that bad. They have to go to the back door. That's not that bad. They're getting in. But it takes away their bodily autonomy and some of their humanity to be relegated as second-class citizens to a door that nobody else goes in, or that only the workers go through. It is not a fun experience, especially if it's not covered. And they, in order to get to it, they have to be in the rain or the weather. These are the ways that ableism plays out. Ableism oftentimes happens in what we don't do, not in what we do. And I'll give you a little fun fact because a lot of people don't know it, and I am committed to making sure that people understand and know how this works. The ADA, does everybody know what the ADA is? The American with Disabilities Act. Okay, it celebrated its 33rd anniversary in October, I think, or no, September. I think it was September. And did you know that the ADA is not enforceable except through criminal or except through legal challenge? There is no agency that enforces the ADA. The only way to get changes or to hold people accountable is for a person with a disability who has been wronged to hire an attorney and to challenge and the issue that is happening with that particular business or space. That is a form of ableism. There is no other governing body. So now you learned something. You can't walk away saying you didn't know anything. You didn't learn anything. I don't know that. I hope some of you knew that, but you may not have known that. So there's that little tidbit for you. So ableism, that's one of the ways, that's one of the questions we have. Another one is, I think we're all aware at this point, the many ways that people can experience discrimination. I shouldn't have to make a list of it on this survey. And my response to that, and I've seen this a couple times on the surveys written in various ways. You all didn't say this, but this is one of the ones we hear. I've heard a couple times. Is that this is something that we constantly work on. The work is never done. And I hear lots of times people tell me, well, you're preaching to the choir. And here's my response. I have yet to meet a choir that doesn't have to rehearse. So we need to constantly be in engagement with these issues because we constantly need to rehearse. I've also heard that the survey is likely aimed at and put together by non-marginalized persons. I'm not sure what that means, except that I wanted to let you know that the survey that you filled out was created by a coalition, a diverse coalition of people with varying identities. And it has been updated and modified. And thank you for those that mentioned that there is a typo on that survey. I did let the office know so that hopefully that it can be corrected. I appreciate that. So moving in, boy, it is just not going. Oh, there it goes. So in terms of calling a minister of color, there are some things that like I said, I have been doing this for over about 20 years now. 15 years ago, the top 5 answers that we had on that survey around calling a minister of color was that they'd be a single issue minister, that they would have an agenda, that they would be too Christian, that they wouldn't be smart or educated enough to be a UU minister. And I can tell you, I heard that 2 months ago. That they will have a chip on their shoulder and that they wouldn't be able to understand him or her. More recently, the top 5 issues are they'll be a single issue minister or have an agenda. Concerns around the church community and the community around the church being very white. Concerns around the congregation being very white, and does the minister know what they're getting themselves into? Will they fit in? Concerns that individuals in the congregation have many spoken and unspoken prejudices that may not be in the light, and so maybe kind of hidden. And a concern that the congregation would lose members. So 15 years ago, the top 5 answers were on the right-hand side, and now the more recent answers over the last 2 to 3 years are on the left. So where did you all go in this? You said that the wider community may not be as welcoming. You have concerns that your congregation is white, and will the minister be comfortable there? Concerns that that the minister might need more time to connect due to cultural differences. Concern that you're not sure the congregation would be as accepting as they think they would. And concerns that the minister might experience microaggressions from within the congregation. So these were your primary answers. And some of you worded them a little different, but just sort of coalesce the general idea. This is what we came out with. So the benefits, though, that you see are that they might bring a different perspective or point of view. They might teach us that you might become a more diverse congregation, and that your minister might have more involvement with the wider community. Okay. So those were your, so I want to go back to some of these and talk about what you said. And I'm going to stop share. So you mentioned that your congregation is very white, and would a minister of color feel comfortable there? So let me assure you, ministers are searching for you as much as you are searching for them. I do not know of anyone in my life, although I would love to know someone who would do this, who has put up a map and then thrown a dart and said, I'm going to go there without any research or anything like that. Because if you do that, then you are a brave human, and I want to know you. But ministers are going to be looking at your congregation. There's a huge packet that your search committee will put together that has demographics, that has all kind your story. It has all kinds of things. It is an unbelievable thing. And here's the other thing. Ministers of color have been Unitarian Universalists for a hot minute. They've been around for a while. They've gone through seminary. They know that Unitarian Universalism is currently a predominantly white denomination. That's not a surprise to them. So they know that anywhere they go, they are likely going, with the exception of one of our congregations in Washington, D.C., or just outside Washington, that they will likely be in the vast minority. So it's not news. So one of the ways oppression happens is what's called oppression through salvation. This happens a lot with people of color. It also happens with disability. And I imagine in Florida, it happens because of the way your government is right now. And oppression through salvation is meeting or knowing something about someone and going, oh my goodness, I know that they would be so uncomfortable here. I don't think they understand what they're getting themselves into. I'm going to vote no, because I want to save them from that trauma. I don't want them to have to experience that ugliness here. That would be an awful sin if we allowed them to be here. So I'm going to vote no because of that. That's called oppression through salvation. That is taking away bodily autonomy, and it is taking away the right of someone to know their own limits and why and their own things. They may have grown up nearby. They may have grown up in the South. They understand the politics that reign here. They may have family that lives nearby. You never know until you ask. And I would ask the question, what interests you? Why here? This is a difficult political climate. Why here? What interests you about our congregation? Always go in with an inquisitive and curious mind. So that's oppression through salvation. See, another one that you said is that they might need more time to connect with the cultural differences. We don't know where people come from. And we have a lot of assumptions about what their lives are like, right? When we did that exercise earlier with the numbers, what I heard a lot of you say is that the experience would have been not good. It would have been harder. But we don't know that about people. We don't know until we start talking to them. I have a very dear friend and fellow facilitator who is a woman of color, who grew up in an all-white household. Her experiences in life mirror mine very, very closely, except that she has had more challenges in that people see the color of her skin and make a lot of assumptions about her. In both communities, in both the Black community, having been raised by a white family, and the white community because she is Black in a white family. So we don't know what that's going to be like. So I encourage you, if you have those concerns, to speak to your candidate and ask them about themselves. Because I'm pretty sure, and I can tell you from vast experience, ministers don't just walk off the street and suddenly get into the pool of candidates. That's not how this happens. All Unitarian Universalist ministers must have an MDiv. That is a master's of divinity. They have attended schooling for a good long time. They've attended a psych eval. They've had a career assessment along with that psych eval. That is a whole weekend of stuff that they have to go do. We have internships we have to do, which is for a year full-time or 2 years half-time in a congregational or pastoral setting under supervision. We have to put together a huge, huge packet for the ministerial fellowshipping committee. And then we have to deliver a sermon and have an interview with, I think I had 6 people in mind, in order to enter into preliminary fellowship, at which point we're cleared to search. And once we are on preliminary fellowship, we have to be recertified 3 times. which takes a year each time to do and requires a committee that you meet with monthly to write a report, and the board of wherever you are to write a report. We also have to do what's called CPE, which is clinical pastoral education in a hospital or care setting. That is a minimum of 10 weeks. I did mine 20 weeks during COVID at a level 1 trauma center in Chattanooga. We don't come to this without a lot of training. We're also required to do continuing education throughout our careers. And we are required to be a part, well, we're not required, but you are encouraged to be a part of the UUMA, which is the UU Ministers Association, which has its own governing body rules that we must abide by, which include ethical standards. Oh, we also have like 3 background checks. How many of you knew it was that intense of a process? No? Yeah. The other thing is I can tell you I have $90,000 in graduate school debt, and I was only in school 3.5 years. So that's the other piece of this. That's a part of this too. So all that is to say that ministers are coming to you really well prepared. Now, are some going to slip through the cracks? Absolutely. That's going to happen. But in general, ministers have gone through a rigorous process in order to be a minister. I went through as fast as you could. I went through in 3.5 years. The average minister takes 6 years to get through. And most of us are working and have families on top of that. So we have a lot of preparation. All right. So in your discussion or in your thoughts about calling a minister of color, you mentioned a few things as positives. One of those is that they would educate us or help us learn more about cultural variations and differences and that kind of stuff. I want to give you a word of caution. When a minister in one of our categories, especially ministers of color, decide to make that their identity primary in their ministry in order to help you work through your thoughts and your feelings and to grow into that, they are placing themselves in a position that is very precarious because they will be seen then as a one-issue minister or with an agenda. It may be that a minister of color's big issue, the thing that they are passionate about, is women's reproductive health. It may be that a minister, Latinx minister is really, really, really excited about Unitarian Universalist history and theology. If you are wanting to know more and learn more about culture, about identity, you need to be very explicit and let your search team know that that's the kind of minister you're looking for, because that changes things. Just having a person who is in that pulpit with an identity does not make you anti-racist. There is more work to be done, and you need to find out if that is work that that minister is really called to. Now, I do a lot of mental health work, but if you ask my congregation, they will tell you that what I preach about more often than not is community and the need and for beloved and the tending of beloved community. So that's what I'm passionate about, is community building and connection. So I don't talk about being gay in the pulpit very often. I don't talk about having a disability in the pulpit very often, because I'm kind of over that. It's not what I'm passionate about. I'm passionate about mental health. I'm passionate about community. Okay. So just be mindful that if you want to learn, just having a minister there is probably of that identity is probably not going to get you what you're hoping for. All right. Another thing that you said about calling a minister of color was that you might become a more diverse congregation and you might have more involvement in the wider world. Let's talk about that for a minute. So, interesting fact, you very well may get more visitors of color if you call a minister of color. But I'm going to ask you a question. When a visitor comes to your congregation and they come through those front doors or the side doors or wherever doors, who are they going to talk to first?
The welcoming committee.
The welcoming committee. So members of the congregation, right? And then they're going to sit there in those lovely chairs with you. And who are they going to sit by? One of y'all, right? They're gonna sit next to you, and they're gonna listen to a service. And I imagine there's gonna be some great music, perhaps by the choir, which is gonna be made up of members of the congregation. And there's probably gonna be a worship team or worship associates that help out in the service. They're gonna do some of the readings and the joys and sorrows and those kind of things. They might hear the minister, they're going to hear the minister, but they're going to speak for maybe 15 minutes, no more than 20, because people will start to text them telling them they've gone too long if they go over 20. Trust me, this happens. And so they're going to hear the minister for 20 minutes. Then after service, they're going to go to coffee hour or social hour, right? And who are they going to talk to there? Are they going to talk to you? Yeah, they're going to talk to you, right? Because the minister is going to be trapped in the hall with the treasurer talking about the budget meeting. So they're going to talk to you. What I'm trying to help you understand is that the ministry of the church belongs to you. Your minister might help you get those visitors in based on identity because they see themselves reflected. But if they don't feel comfortable and connected to you, they are not going to stay, and it has nothing to do with the minister. Most of you do not come to church to hear the minister. It's a bonus. You come to church to be with like-minded people, to be challenged, to be filled up. And the minister is definitely a part of that. They make space for that. But that minister is not the church. You are the church. And so if you want more diversity, you need to look around and realize what are the things that are hindering us from keeping people of color within our pews. And it might just be demographics of the area you're in, and that's okay. But don't assume that the minister is going to bring that piece to you and make it stay. A minister can't do that. And once a congregation realizes that they are the ministry of the church, everything changes. Any questions on that? Or any of that? That was a lot. Okay. Well, let's move to the next one. I'm going to share my screen again. I'm sorry my screen is being so wonky. Y'all, it is. We're just going to have to kind of work with it. I'm going to have my wife look at my computer and see why it does not like me so much. Next is calling a minister with a disability. You all had a lot to say on this one. So looking at 15 years ago, our top 5 concerns about calling a minister of color. First one was stamina. Will they be able to do this really heavy job? Second was our building isn't accessible and it will cost too much money to make it accessible. A third concern was, will we have to take care of our minister? Fourth was not being able to understand them. And fifth was, will the minister fall off the wagon? A minister who's in recovery. Now, more recently, we hear stamina. Will they be able to do the job? Our building isn't accessible. It will cost too much money to make it so. Will we have to take care of our minister? We won't be able to understand them, and we don't want a depressed minister. Do you notice anything about these lists? They are virtually the same. So in 15 years, we have made little to no progress in examining how we feel and how we talk about and how we engage with disability and accessibility. And I can tell you that it's even worse than that. I've been a Unitarian Universalist for over 30 years now. And I can tell you that in the 30 years I have been a Unitarian Universalist, we have not changed in how we engage with, talk about, or move to make things better around accessibility and disability. We have failed as a denomination to address this issue. Now, I can tell you that the UUA in April hired 2 disability advocates within our structure. I am one of them. I work 9 hours a week with that group. And we have another, Gretchen is another disability associate who works with identity-based ministries and works with congregations on accessibility and disability issues. She has 15 hours a week. It's a start, but it's a slow one. And we've been asking for this for 30 years. All right. So what did you all say? Well, you were pretty right on target. You asked about stamina. Will they be able to do the job? Concerns about them being a single issue minister and having an agenda. Concerns that your campus is not accessible enough. Concerns about communication in which you understand them. Concerns around having to take care of your minister. You have concerns around a minister with mental health concerns and cognitive difficulties. You have deep concerns around cognitive and psychiatric issues preventing them from being good leaders. And the cost to accommodate is too high. So this is what you all said. You said there were some benefits, again, perspective and teach us. Show us that the job could be done despite the disability. You might attract new members and make you more diverse, and they might teach you about compassion. So let's go back first. I want to address a few of these. First, I want to talk about stamina. As you heard me say a few minutes ago, ministers go through a rigorous training process. We know whether or not we have the stamina, but here's where the stamina question comes into play and where it becomes a real problem. We don't ask seemingly temporarily able-bodied people this same question. This is a hard job, no matter who's doing it. The expectations are beyond anything that is actually achievable. So if we should be asking every single minister, how do you engage in self-care? The other piece of that is, what boundaries do you set around self-care? And then it is the congregation's responsibility to honor those boundaries. We expect often in congregations for ministers to work 100 hours a week. We want them at committee meetings. We want them at social events. We want them to preach on Sunday. We want them to do pastoral care. We want them out in the streets doing legislative work and social justice work. We want them doing interfaith work. My congregation has learned this last year that I am a master at empowering them to do the things that they are interested in doing. I get probably 20 emails a week saying, we should do such and such. We should do such and such. And sometimes it's, you should do such and such. My response is always, that is a fantastic idea. I am so glad to see you excited about this issue. I look forward to hearing from the team that you assemble and supporting you in your work. Thank you so much for your dedication and your time and for sharing this with me. You want to know how many of those actually happen?
Very few.
Very few. I am a master at boundaries because I have to be. because I live with a disability that requires me to get a certain amount of sleep. I live with a disability that sometimes makes it to where walking across the room is not a good idea. It's not even possible. So I've made certain accommodations for myself. My congregation knows that Monday is my Sabbath. I try very hard not to even look at my email on Monday. Sometimes I'm not so good at that. But I don't handle any church business generally on Monday. Sometimes I handle BCT business, but not church business. That is because Monday is my Sabbath. It is one day that I take for rest and renewal so that I may be present with my congregation. The average minister spends over 20 hours on each sermon, because that involves reading and research and writing and rewriting. We have to be ready to pivot at a moment's notice when something tragic happens in the country on Saturday night and we wake up on Sunday morning. We expect a lot of our ministers. So I encourage you, I implore you, I beg you, please set reasonable expectations with your minister. Please understand that everything they attend is a working hour, and that just because they are salaried does not mean you get to abuse them. How many of you were salaried when you were working your jobs? Okay. Did you get calls at 2 a.m.? Sometimes, yeah. If you were a doctor or something like that, yeah. Ministers get calls at 2 a.m. quite frequently. It's amazing. All hours of the night. All right. But we don't get paid nearly as much as doctors or lawyers or anything like that. Right? You may see the package and think that it's a lot. Ministers are considered self-employed, so we have to pay extra taxes. It's fantastic. So please, please, please put reasonable expectations out there, because that's where stamina comes in. And here's the other thing. I can't promise you that a minister who is seemingly able-bodied when you hire them is not going to get hit by a bus 2 weeks after being with you. And everything changes, right? We have to be willing to change with it. Another thing that you all said was our campus is not accessible enough. Okay, I believe that. Most campuses aren't. And my question to you then is, you are an aging congregation. I know many of you have needs. What's the holdup, friends? Thomas, tell me what the holdup is. You're gonna have to unmute though.
Yeah. What you probably can't see is Dave Williams, who is sitting here with us, and a crew actually put in a ramp for the chancel, rebuilt a railing for it and all. We are also talking about parking near the main building for people, better parking conditions so that they have better access to the building. So I insist that, yes, we are working on it.
Good.
Obviously, we probably need more help, but we are doing it.
That's
I don't let that
wonderful.
Go by.
And I'm glad to see that. That's a beautiful ramp, by the way. That is one of the most beautiful ramps I have seen in a congregation. I wish mine had one that looked that nice. Ours is, it's there. And it looks like it is to spec in terms of slope. So good job on that. Are there other places on your campus that people with accessibility issues can't access easily? What about your bathroom doors? Do they open out or in? They open out? Okay. That's an accessibility challenge. If you are in a wheelchair, outward opening doors are almost impossible to navigate without assistance. Do you have gravel or do you have concrete outside? And okay. Yeah, that becomes a challenge. That becomes a challenge. So listen, here's the thing. Like I said, I'm not here to guilt you. I'm here to help you think about these things, because we tend to not think about what we need until we need it. And then it's a scramble to do it, right? Then we got to figure out where the money's going to come from. There's a panic, there's all this kind of stuff. But if we start thinking about these things ahead of time before we need them, it's so much easier to talk about them. I worked with one congregation that was not accessible, and they did not even think about accessibility until one of their beloved members was in a car accident that made him a quadriplegic. And suddenly they figured out a way to make everything work and be accessible. And the question was then raised, why didn't we do this 20 years ago? Why did we have to wait? So the accessibility one is true. The financial end of it is true. It can be a lot. I want to talk about cognitive and psychiatric issues to prevent good leadership. This is a myth. Plain and simple. Anyone who, as you heard me say, you heard me talk about the process. Anyone coming through this process, they've been through the ringer, right? They have the ability to do this. I live with some pretty profound ADD. My daughter, the apple does not fall far from the tree in that way. She has profound ADHD. She lives with intense anxiety, and she is also on the spectrum. I also live with intense anxiety and depression, and I'm dyslexic. So all the ways that I have found to work with that don't cost too much. I have a wonderful office administrator who does all my proofreading for me, which is awesome. If you've ever gotten an email from me, you might look at it and go, huh. But that's because the way my brain is. But my office admin is wonderful in doing that. I have a calendar system that's set up to help me work around my ADD and help me work with it. But having those things also makes me a really good minister, because I focus on a lot of things at one time, and I actually do it very well. I'm extremely creative. And I have a whole lot of patience for people with differing abilities. So it's okay to be concerned about things. Where it becomes a problem is when we let that concern be the driving force for our decisions without looking further, without coming with an inquisitive mind and asking questions. If a minister discloses that they have a learning disability to you, you can go, oh, that must be interesting with that as a minister. How do you navigate that? That's an okay question to ask. Because you can ask that of any of your ministers. Again, this is a demanding job. How do you navigate the demands of this kind of job? As long as you're asking it to all of the people you're talking to, or if you're asking it with an inquisitive mind and not a judgmental space. Does that make sense? I think it's pretty self-explanatory. In your benefits, again, you said teach us. I warn you, just be a little bit careful about that. One I do want to talk about is show us that the job can be done despite the disability. This is a little dangerous territory, and we get into what is called inspiration porn at this point. This is where we look at the stories of people with disabilities doing things that people all over the world do, and we go, oh, they're so inspiring. They have overcome such challenge, and they make us feel so good. You want to know what? They're just living their lives. And they don't want to be your inspiration. It's okay to admire people. There's nothing wrong with that. But in that idea that they are there, that in spite of their disability, they're not doing things in spite of their disability. They're doing things because the way they're doing them because of their disability. Adaptive skiers aren't skiing despite being disabled. They're skiing the way they do because they're disabled, and that they're just living life. And while that might be make us feel hopeful, that's fine, but just be careful about getting caught up in the idea of oh, they're so inspiring. That puts a lot of pressure on a person to always overcome, right? And there's some things that we can't overcome if you are disabled. It just doesn't happen. When I have to use a scooter or a chair, I can't overcome opening doors that come out, that open out. I can't overcome that. I need help. Right? And when I do it, it's not inspiring. It's clumsy and gross and unfortunate and it's not fun. So they're living life. So be careful about inspiration porn. And if you want to look, I would encourage you to go look up more definitions of inspiration porn, because there's some really interesting TED Talks. I think there's a couple TED Talks about it that are pretty fascinating. And again, I'm not here to shame you. I want you to understand, because when we know more, when we know more, we do better, right? That's what I tell my kids all the time. When we know more, we're able to do better. Let's see if there was anything else on here. And teach us about compassion. You know, okay, maybe. I know some disabled people that are really jerks. I don't know that they could teach me about compassion. Right? So let's be careful about lumping into a category, right? Disabled people are people, first and foremost. They get grumpy. They can be brilliant. They can be mean. Yeah, all the things, right? Just like every other human being. So if we want to learn about compassion, there are other ways to do that without tokenizing an individual. And also having a minister who is disabled does not necessarily, again, mean that you're going to become more diverse, right? For all the same reasons. They might bring people in, but you got to keep them. Okay. Any questions on disability? Thoughts? Y'all are rocking it. All right, last one. Let's see, I got to do this again. All right, next one is going to be calling a minister who is LGBTQIA. 15 years ago, we actually had 6. There was a tie. People were concerned we'd become known as the gay church, that they were not great role models for kids. Will our kids be safe? I actually heard, will our kids be safe if we call a gay minister last year? Single issue, have an agenda. Concerns about living in a conservative area and violence against the congregation. Concerns that the minister would not be able to provide pastoral care to straight people. And a close 6, that a minister would be promiscuous. Please note that transgender was not covered in VCT until the late 90s. Now, more recently, what we hear are concerns about a transgender minister not being ready. We don't know that we're ready. There's too much we don't know. A single issue, will they have an agenda? Will we become known as the gay church? That we live in a conservative area and there might be violence against us. And then another tie, we need someone who will attract families. We aren't as welcoming as we think we are. All right. And where y'all came in, y'all didn't have too much to say on this issue. There were some concerns about a single issue. Will they have an agenda? A valid concern, a very valid concern, that we live in Florida and the wider community is extremely conservative. And retaliation from the wider community and a focus on identity too much, basically too flamboyant. They're okay as long as they're not too gay. We don't want the Just Jack, right? If you knew that show. So single issue we've talked about. You live in Florida and the wider community is extremely conservative. Absolutely. This is fair. This is absolutely a fair concern. And still, let me tell you, there are some brave ministers who are doing some wonderful work. I myself and my family will not set foot in Florida because it's not safe for us. And we know that. Alabama is soon to be on that list, and our state of Georgia is creeping near, and we're not sure what we're going to do when that does happen. Tennessee is also out. So while there are some challenges in that regard, there are some ministers who are brave and wonderful and true and deeply dedicated, doing amazing ministry in Florida. They feel called to that ministry. Trust me, again, no minister is going to blindly come to Florida. They know exactly what they're getting into. That is an active choice. Okay. So don't let that be too much of a concern. I will tell you, we already are the gay church. So yeah, we're just gonna go with that. People know us as the gay church. And that's just kind of where we live. So, and then and then again, the two gay, that is what it is. You also said, let's see, you said that there were some benefits. Oops, that's the wrong one. There were some benefits, and those were, gosh, this is annoying. I hate having to do it this way. That you would be living your values, and that they would bring a different perspective, teach us, and they would bring diversity. All these we've already talked about, right? So we know that these aren't necessarily bad things, but they could be dangerous areas. So we just got to be careful, right? So I will tell you something interesting. The only time that calling a minister with one of these in these categories, one or more, can really sort of benefit you is a lot of times, a concern for a long time was that we can't call a minister who is gay because we want to attract families. That was a concern for a long time. And what we found actually is that calling a gay minister or a queer minister actually increases the likelihood of younger families coming to a congregation than a straight minister. It's a small margin, but the reason cited was that parents wanted their children to see diversity and be exposed to diversity in that way. And like I said, y'all didn't have too much to say about calling a minister who is LGBTQIA+. Any questions on that one before I move on to the next one? Okay, that one's pretty straightforward. Come on, there we go. You did have some other categories that you had thoughts on. And we're getting close to the end, I promise. We're not too far off. Overweight. Concerns that the minister is unhealthy and it's a negative model of leadership. That the congregation can be slow to trust people who are different from them. A younger minister might not be as respected and couldn't connect. Gender bias definitely exists within the congregation. And it was interesting. I had two. One said there is no way there is gender bias that doesn't exist in this congregation, period. And the very next one said it absolutely exists in this congregation. We are 66 female, but there are a lot more men in leadership. An older person might be a problem because we don't want to invest in all this effort for a very short ministry. God language apparently is a problem. I'm going to tell you, when I hear that in a congregation, I always make sure to put some kind of God language in just to make sure they don't spontaneously combust and prove it to them. And then an expectation of above average intelligence, sermons, and social awareness. So these were the things that you mentioned in addition to. So, and I think we don't really have to cover much on this. We've talked, what we've talked about really does sort of lay into a lot of this anyway. I want to encourage you to think about younger ministers. We like to think sometimes they don't have enough gravitas, they can't connect with us, and whatnot. They tend to have some more energy, which is nice. I will tell you that 60% of my congregation is over 60, and I have loved and connected with all of them, and we have a decent generation gap there. Okay, so younger ministers can be wonderfully insightful, and some of our best preachers right now, I'll tell you, we've got some amazing preachers that are younger. Also, let's see, overweight. Again, that's a stereotype. And healthy negative models of leadership. That is falling into the trap of our beauty standards and our social norms, which are not necessarily based in any kind of reality. We don't know people's health. I know people who are teeny tiny little people who are completely as unhealthy as you could ever imagine. So we really sort of make stereotypes by that. And in terms of leadership, same goes. Okay. And then expect above average intelligence, sermons, and social awareness. I really don't know how you overcome that. Or where that plays in, except to know that our ministers are extremely well trained. All right.
Special.
What was that?
I have to say, we are so special.
Yes. So yeah, and here's the thing. You know, in terms of your answers and all that, I know congregations, when I leave them, I always get these emails going, oh gosh, you know, I can't believe we said all those things. And I say, you know, listen, you are a special snowflake in a sea of special snowflakes. Congratulations, you're just like everyone else. Because all those answers that you gave are answers I hear every time I do this, right? We're all doing the work. So just as a reminder, so I can get you out of here in the time I promised you, oppression through salvation. This is how oppression happens. This is when we're going to save them. Oppression by expecting someone to teach me about their identity, not when I don't recognize that can put them in a precarious position. The burden of grace and emotional labor. We didn't talk about this one too much, except to say that oftentimes we expect the person who is being hurt or harmed because of our biases, we expect them to give us grace. We don't allow them space to be annoyed or angry about that, and that we ask them to carry the emotional labor of our work. Check the box, the work never ends. This is the assumption that we don't have to keep talking about these things because we already sat through this 3-hour workshop. Wasn't that enough? The idea that they must be so interested in something that has to do with their identity when really their passion lies somewhere else. Oppression happens through silence, when we don't stand up and say things that, you know, when the racist joke is told and we don't comment about it, and we don't say that doesn't really fit our values. When we forget where the ministry of the church actually lies, and that is with us as a congregation. Remembering that the minister is out there to help draw people in, but at the end of the day, the community is what is built around a person. Oppression happens through the assumption that a minister should be on call, working all the time and not having good boundaries. And then through microaggressions. Oh, come on. You're doing so good. Oh, there we go. No, come on. I like this quote by Maya Angelou. It's one of my favorites. My children hear me say it all the time. Do the best you can. And when you know better, you do better. Right? When we know better, we do better. So my last question for you is, I want you to just think about, you don't have to answer, but think about, how are you going to help make this a successful ministry? What are you going to bring to the table? Is it your full self? Is it your energy? Is it your wallet? Is it your time? Is it your curiosity? Is it your willingness to have hard discussions and sit in the muck of life? So thinking about that. Any questions? Yes.
I want to go back to the point that you made about you wouldn't step foot in Florida.
Yeah.
That's not an entirely, it's something I can understand. I mean, there have been more than one of us who said that Florida has changed in the last few years and that it is not as welcoming as it once was. But having said that, though, aren't you in some ways making the same statement that you are telling us not to make in our choice of a minister? The other part of it is you live in Macon, Georgia. This is hardly a liberal bastion that accepts gay people. And that what is the substantive difference between what you're living in and what it would be in Florida, other than Florida's getting in the news now?
The transgender law that might take my children away from my wife. Because my wife is gender queer. And I have a child that is exploring gender. And as long as that law remains or that statute is present, I cannot safely. It's not about, I love Florida. I spent every summer of my life in Florida. I miss it. But it is not safe for my family, and that's the difference. It is not oppression, it is not bias when safety is involved. And the fact that my family has to travel with our marriage certificate, the adoption that we had to go through, even though my wife was present and part of my pregnancies and in the birthing room, we have to carry powers of attorney. We have to carry all these documents with us. They belong in all of our cars and anytime we travel, because it is not safe. And currently, Georgia does not have that law, but I can tell you that my wife and I have an exit plan out of this country. We have 3 ways to get out. And if certain triggers happen, we will leave because it's not safe for us. Now, other families make other decisions. My wife has been accosted in bathrooms here in Georgia and told she doesn't belong there. I have been told that I'm an abomination in the eyes of God. We have received death threats. We have cameras at our home, and my church is installing cameras outside of our congregation to protect me. So bias is different than safety. Bias is different than safety. I appreciate the question, but the situation is different.
You make a good point, and I appreciate the answer.
Sure.
This congregation, and I think and others like us, are actively involved in fighting against the types of things that you're talking about.
Yeah.
And I would hope that we would get a minister that would help us in that fight.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I tell you, any minister that comes to these battleground states like Florida and like Georgia, like Texas and Arizona, like Tennessee, any minister who's ministering in these places, it's on our hearts. We think about it almost every day, about how can we protect our congregation? How can we inspire our congregation? Because, you know, Georgia is a political battleground state right now. We know that we will be in the eye of everything in the next year. And so it is very important that our ministers and our congregations are active. And let me tell you this, make no mistake. Let me be absolutely clear. I stand in awe of the congregations that are living, especially in the more restrictive places. I stand in absolute awe and gratitude for what you were doing and the fact that you can stay and that you are doing the work, because I don't want to leave the South. It's my home. I grew up in Alabama. I spent every summer of my life in Destin. I don't want to leave the South. If I leave, it will be because I will be a refugee, not because I wanted to go. So thank you for the work that you all are doing. It is so important. it means so much. And the ministers that stay there, they need so much more support because it's such a hard, it's an even harder job. So thank you. Any other questions about bias, about chickens? I know a lot about chickens. I can even tell you how to put a chicken to sleep. It's a great party trick.
How do you do it?
How do you do it? Okay, so here's how you do it. When you get a chicken, you take it and you hold it like this. You tuck its head under its wing, right? And you swing it around 3 times in big, slow circles, and you set it on the ground, and it'll stay there till it falls over. It's true. My father-in-law taught me that. May his memory be a blessing. Any other questions that I can answer for you?
We really appreciate what you brought to us today.
Thank you. Thank you. I want to leave you with just 3 quick reminders. Remember that you are not a bad you if you do not call a minister in any of these categories. If a white, straight, middle-aged male is the right fit, then that's the fit for you. And that is perfect. I want you to remember that you're looking for the right fit, not the most comfortable fit. Because the right fit means that we are growing, that sometimes we're going to be uncomfortable, that we're going to be moved to do the hard things that our faith and our values call us to do. And I want you to remember that you are the ministry of that church. You are who the people that come in stay for. Because ministers come and go. You are the heart and soul of that congregation. And last but not least, I want you to remember this work does not end. It goes on and on and on and on until we draw our last breath. And hopefully we can share what we know with others. And then eventually, by the time we draw our last breath, perhaps the world will be a little better place. Thank you so much, beloveds, for allowing me to be with you in this time. Thank you for engaging in this work. Thank you for the ministry that you will do and continue to do in conjunction with your new minister. Love on your search committee. They deserve it. They deserve it. And I hope you have a wonderful afternoon. And so by a show of hands, did you learn at least one thing today, even if it's only how to put a chicken to sleep? Awesome. Then I have done my job, and I am so grateful for you.
Too low of a bar, Amanda. I just want to thank you on behalf of the search committee. I think it was an exceptional workshop. I thank all of you folks for coming out and those who are online. This far exceeded my expectations, and thank you all.
Bye. Good luck.